Hello there, and welcome to Untitled Film Podcast with Callum and Johnny. I'm Callum.
And I'm Johnny.
And this week we will be talking about some very exciting movies. But first, I feel like we should address an elephant in the room.
Big elephant in the room. Firstly, I want to say that's getting more hello, good morning, Vietnam.
Wow, that's not a bad thing.
It's just struck me that it's getting more Robin Williams all the time. But yes, there is an elephant in the room. This is a remake.
This is a remake. You may have noticed on our socials that we had last week's episode was cancelled, and that was because we recorded the whole thing, and for some reason about 5 minutes in, the software that we use started to, shall I say, fuck up, is probably the only way to describe it, and completely ruined the whole episode, and it sounded like we were Max Headroom from the 80s.
There was a lot of sort of tropes,
particularly from you, because you'd already said tropes
about a million times.
So this is a remake.
Yes.
Of that episode. So that is the elephant in the room. The other one is that I'm actually Johnny and he's Callum.
Yes, and that will get more and more confusing. Like, who am I? What is my name? It's an existential crisis waiting to happen, basically.
It really is. We also have some other exciting news. We have got a collab episode coming up with a big supporter of the channel, Mr. What's his name? Mr. Dog
Brain Videos.
So he will be joining us for a very special Christmas episode, a bit closer to Crimbo. I can't decide if it's going to be next week or the week after.
That has been recorded. It's in the can, and it's going to be fun, very funny, very exciting.
It is indeed. And that brings us on nicely, I think, to this week's question. Now, where did we put this week's question?
It is on our social media pages, which, as always, is Untitled Film Podcast on Instagram and on Facebook. And the question this week is one I put out. It was laughably poor how I put it out. It was a very low-res image with very poor writing, so I don't...
The wrong colour.
He's
never going to be allowed... The wrong colour, Dad.
Wrong colour, Dad.
He is never, ever going to be allowed near
a
anything graphic again.
Never again.
Never again.
But the question was, what is the worst film made by the best director, or a director that you really like? So the one I used as my example was David Lynch's Dune. It's a total mess, even with Sting wearing silver wing-fronted Y-fronts.
The only thing I would say with that is, I actually like the lead performance from
Kyle MacLachlan.
I just like Kyle MacLachlan. And also, I don't think that's the only film that David Lynch ever made that's a complete mess.
No, I think all of his
Highways.
films
is.
But they're a lot more ambitious and crazy and cool and weird. This one is
a lot more ambitious than a low-budget sci-fi movie.
Oh, it was huge budget for the time.
Well, it was, yeah, but it feels low budget.
I mean, it looks pretty shonky in a lot of ways, but okay. I mean, in 1984 money, it was made for $30 or $40 million, which is like 120 equivalent. I don't know, inflation, but
that's still not huge. Right, it still wasn't like the biggest budget. Well, it wasn't Star Wars. Budget. No, exactly.
But it's a reasonable budget for that film.
Yeah, but well, is it though? Because that film, as we're now finding out, needed to be 2 books and incredibly high budget to make it work. So, or 2 books, 2 films, sorry, and an incredibly high budget to make it work. So, actually, maybe maybe had it right all along. But no, and I will give you my example. Not that it was an example.
We also have an answer from Dog Brain Videos on that.
We do indeed. But my answer was, I've actually got 2 from the same director.
Ooh.
Panic Room and Benjamin Button.
Ah, yes. Good choices.
Both from Mr. David Fincher, who's probably, in my opinion, the best working director currently.
There's certainly a good argument to be made there.
I think he's tight, he's cinematically brilliant, he knows a good script. He's one of my favourite directors. But Panic Room's a bit of a mess. It's watchable, but it's a bit of a mess. Benjamin Button is hokey Oscar bait. It's actually not a bad movie like Nuts and Bolts in a way. And obviously, did it win the Oscar? It certainly was nominated.
It was nominated for a whole load. I don't think it won any of its major ones, but I think it got a few technical ones. Yeah.
But yeah, I just thought it was cheesy, hokey rubbish and stupid. Whereas what I want him doing is like crime or murder or social networks being created.
And Panic Room is quite solid and dependable, but it's
not
that's all
a
it is.
David Fincher movie.
It's a solid thriller.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
It is not Seven or The Social Network or any of these great movies that he's done over the years.
And from Dog Brain Videos, his answer to this question was Oz the Great and Powerful. He's a huge Sam Raimi fan. I mean, you can't stop him talking about Sam Raimi if he starts. But that was his answer. And actually, I think I turned it off at about half an hour in.
Yeah, I've not watched it.
It's not good.
Although, I mean, we can argue about Evil Dead 2 until the cows come home.
No, we can't. It's a masterpiece. we absolutely cannot argue about Evil Dead 2. Evil Dead 2 is one of the greatest films made, especially in its subgenre. No, we absolutely can't argue about that. There's no argument there. What argument could you make about Evil Dead 2, genuinely?
None, I just knew it'd wind you up. Evil Dead 3, though.
Army of Darkness, I can understand people not...
Army of Darkness is a mess.
Not digging it. I find it a lot of fun, but...
It is fun, but it's just a weird, high-budget mess. But anyway...
I certainly wouldn't defend it in the way I would Evil Dead 2.
I mean, Evil Dead 2 is the better of the three. It was the best of the three.
Yeah.
The better makes it sound like the other two are not good, which... Army of
Son of a
Darkness,
bitch.
mixed. Anyway, after that little wind-up, we should now move on to... the
news.
No, we're not doing this.
Already done. Already finished. Did you turn me down?
No, I haven't. I've actually turned myself down because I thought it'd be funnier to turn myself down than turn you down. But now I've turned you off. Right, so there is some big news that was new last week, and it is still, I think, important and big news.
Still very relevant.
No one can hear you.
Oh, you have turned me down.
I have now.
Why?
Because I thought we were funny.
I finished my bit. I finished my thing.
Well, it's punishment, though.
What? The way you treat me
is deserved, and I think all the listeners out there agree.
It's only me and sweatshop workers that have it this bad.
Anyway.
You still managed to hit your microphone.
Actually, I didn't. You're shaking the table.
Oh, it's because I got my arm on the table.
Well, exactly. Loser. Anyway, so, yes, Disney. Biggest media company in the world. It's 71, I think it was. The information is not as fresh in my head as it was last week. The 71-year-old Bob Eisner retired 2 years ago and went off to play probably golf. That's what rich retired people do, I think, in America.
Yeah.
Especially if they're in Florida. And, yeah, he went to do that. And Bob Chesapeake, I want to say his name is. Anyway, another Bob took over. 2 years later, that Bob is out and Bob Iger is back, pulled from the jaws of retirement, restored to the lofty heights of running the biggest media conglomerate in the world, which he pretty much made the biggest media conglomerate. After quite a long period of Michael Eisner, what's the best way to describe Michael Eisner's reign? Michael Eisner's kind of expansion, but in maybe an ADHD kind of way. So Michael Eisner, when he was in charge of Disney, took over a Disney that was struggling a bit, rebuilt the animation back up from after the 80s, which was awful, but also launched Euro Disney, Disney in Japan, and kind of tried to expand like the partner business a lot and do all these things. But he also kind of tried to do them all a bit on the cheap because he wanted to do lots of things instead of concentrating on one or two big things. And some had success, some didn't. And the company kind of fixed itself from being at a really low ebb, but it never quite worked. He also signed up Pixar initially, but also then fell out with Pixar big time. And Bob Eisner came in, and one of his first things when Bob Eisner came in was to buy Pixar. So he kind of really shored up the future of Disney's animation because, let's be honest, the majority of them. Well, obviously there has been a couple of biggies now, but for a long period of time, the majority of the animation money, as animation tended to move towards digital, was coming from Pixar. And then you obviously got some big movies like Frozen and stuff, which kind of then came from Disney. But again, a lot of that stuff came from Pixar. A lot of the crews and things came over from Pixar. He then bought Marvel, which I don't think we need to go into too much detail on, was an incredibly smart move. At the time, everyone was like, why has this guy spent all this money on this little rinky-dink company that only ever has made a couple of semi-successful franchises, and they've both been sold off to other things? Well, they were proven wrong.
Here we are.
And then kind of one of his last big acquisitions was Star Wars. Again, Star Wars, people were like, why have you paid that much for Star Wars? What are you going to be able to do? How much money can you make out of one more trilogy? Well, people didn't realise he was going to make 7,000 TV series, 900 movies in between the trilogy, rebuild half the theme parks with a giant Star Wars area and make it into a giant money-making machine. And that he was very singly focused on these things. But the other thing that he was very good at doing was steering the company through, should we say, the modern world. Obviously, if you look back at some of Disney's history, some of it's a bit sketchy, pretty much erased that from history and got rid of a lot of things that are questionable from its past, and kind of, moved and grew the company, made it, dare I say, woke, although I hate that term, and kind of modernized it. And that is where Bob number 2 failed, evidently. He came in and there was a massive... obviously, Florida is pretty Republican in most, well, not in most areas, but it is, Republicans seem to win elections down in the Bayou. Actually, that's not the Bayou, is it? It is the Bayou is New Orleans.
New Orleans, yeah.
What is it? What are the swamps down there called? Everglades.
Yes.
Florida Everglades, in the Everglades. And there was a big thing this year where the... I don't know if it was the governor, but some of the politicians anyway in Florida were trying to bring in rules which kind of forbid the teaching of different non-cis lifestyles and various other things that were pretty anti-LGBTQ+. And Disney kind of shat the bed on their response to it, shall we say, where they tried to appease both camps and appease no one. And obviously, as the biggest employer in the state, should have just said, fuck you, government. We are a multicultural, LGBTQ positive company, and fuck you. And didn't. And it massively scarred the company. Lots of really valuable and good employees left, and a lot of other really good and valuable employees spoke out. It kind of, damaged it in the eyes of, many of their kind of core audience, and didn't really win any favours with the other side either, because they didn't really fully support that too. So, instead of doing the right thing, they fudged the wrong thing and ends up making no one happy. So it kind of, this has been dripping on. He's never really managed to get on top of it. And yeah, he's kind of been ousted, and Eisner is back. So that's that piece of news.
Very exciting. And that always seems to happen when people take a wishy-washy middle ground approach. They end up pleasing no one. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
I think sometimes in life doing the right thing is the hard thing. But I think in the end, 9 out of 10 times you're rewarded for it. And they should have done the right thing.
Absolutely.
Instead of fudging something that, appease no one. But I mean, I'm not going to say I'm like the full, what's the word? I don't think I have the, the full understanding of the complete political situation. And obviously I'm not LGBTQ+, although I would like to say I'm an ally. But yeah, so from that point of view, I don't know the full picture, but that's, what I got from it. And I think it sounds a good thing that Eisner is back.
Yes, very much so.
Eisner?
Iger.
Eisner is the 90s Michael Eisner.
Similar names.
Yes. Cool. But yeah. So that's my piece of news. I'm just going to do one piece this week because that was quite a long piece. Callum, what are yours?
Well, first one is a fairly sad one, I'm afraid. The B-movie filmmaker Albert Pyun has died. You might not know him from his name, but he is the director of you remember the 90s Captain America film where he had ears stuck onto his helmet?
I do. The one that was like contractually made so someone didn't lose the
rights.
Yeah, exactly.
And he also is the director of Cyborg, which was one of the first starring roles for Jean-Claude Van Damme. It sort of kicked off his career. He was known for being fairly ambitious within his kind of unambitious realm, where other directors would go to a desert, stick some lads in leather, make a Mad Max ripoff, in all shot in wide angle, and then call it a day. He tried to, he'd try and find these weird locations, get stuck in there with the fight scenes. So within his very unambitious realm of the B movies that he made in the early to mid 90s, he tried to kind of...
He's a bit Corman-esque in a way.
Kick his way out of the box a bit. And this something that people knew was coming because his wife announced several days ago that... that he is dying. He has dementia and multiple sclerosis, and he's had it for many years. And because he's had it for many years, they sort of knew that it was within this year, 2022, the latter half of 2022, that this was going to be his last 6 months or so. And so his wife put out a call on social media to ask fans to send messages to him, telling them their favorite moments. And the YouTube channel Red Letter Media made a special episode and they kind of deal on that kind of thing. They do videos on trash movies, and they made a special episode reviewing Cyborg and one of his other films. And apparently, before he died, it cheered him up no end. So he's been survived by his wife. He died at the age of 69, and he, is a true champion of that kind of cinema. So it's a sad loss for B movie fans such as myself who like that kind of thing, trashy sort of thing. So that's very sad. And yes, my second piece of news is not nearly as sad. It's the projected box office opening weekend, because I am a box office fan, as people are probably starting to learn, that Avatar: The Way of Water is on track to open to around 150 to 175 million dollars, which, while about double the opening weekend of the first film, which was in the 77 range, the true strength of the first film's box office was not in its huge opening weekend. It was pretty tepid. It was that it just kept sticking around.
Yeah, people went to go and see it because they were like this visual feast they'd never seen before, and first proper use of 3D, etc.
Yes. Yeah. And so it ended up making about 10 times its opening weekend.
Okay. So what interests me about this is, I feel like if I went on the street and asked 50 people, did you know there's a new Avatar movie coming out next month or this month, whenever it's coming out? Is it coming out Boxing Day?
So it would be next month.
Well, this month, probably when the podcast comes out.
Probably when the podcast airs, yes.
Yeah. I don't think that a huge amount of people would say, I know that's coming out.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I actually think that is reflected a little bit in 150 million, because that sounds very big, but we're in a realm.
It's not Marvel big.
It's not Marvel big. Wakanda Forever just opened in the 180 range, and that was lower than Black Panther 1, which was 200. So if it's only 150 to 175, it's going to have to really rely on legs. And are those legs going to be there this time around?
Yeah,
possibly not.
I mean, part of me wonders, well, maybe they've got the marketing machine going a bit earlier and a bit quicker in the States as well. Maybe that will come. But yeah, I haven't really seen much. Like Top Gun, Maverick, which obviously is biggest movie of the year so far, I think.
Yes, it is.
I don't know if Wakanda Forever may overtake it, but they're both biggies. But I knew that was coming a long way out. Like there was, so I remember I watched Formula One, and I remember Tom Cruise being on the Formula One last year, laying the groundwork for it, like doing some pre-race stuff, driving around with the presenters and things in like cars and doing like pretend dog fights, and him doing, and them all doing like, I feel the need for speed and all these things, and kind of intercut with bits of it. And then I remember he was on like talk shows and things for months in advance, and I haven't seen Sam Worthington about. I haven't seen Zoe Saldana and stuff. Like I haven't seen this stuff going on. So
also the true test will be in its legs, and that depends if people like it. We've had two films that Cinema Score is the true indicator of how much people like it, not IMDb, not Rotten Tomatoes, because those are obviously brigaded quite often. If a film is deemed too woke, it'll be, nonsense like that.
Well,
You'll
but that
be
happens with
brigaded.
cinema score as well.
Oh, it's not
I was watching
perfect.
some quite interesting stuff about the new Disney film, Strange Worlds.
Yes.
And obviously that has a quite a central LGBTQ
Yes, it
plus
does.
character. And like the cinema score's quite low. It's only like
really?
a C plus or something.
Oh, my.
And a lot of that is because of that. There's a lot of where it's been, because the whole point obviously is for them to work out how they think it will do at the box
Yes.
office. And obviously, it's only meant to be like a 7 out of 10 movie anyway. But a lot of
These films are often rated higher because most people go to cinema just to see a movie.
yeah, but the cinema score has been kind of pulled down actually by the fact a lot of people went, "Oh, no, I don't really want my kids seeing that," and stuff.
That's a shame.
Unfortunately, yeah, very indicative. But yeah, anyway, so I think it does bring those things down, but you don't probably get those campaigns from like right wing mental groups, the kind of people that
it's harder.
Elon Musk seems to be trying to promote at the moment on Twitter.
A good example would be The Woman King, which opened several months ago. It got an A+ cinema score, which was reflected in its quite leggy box office. It only opened to about 19 million. It managed to get over 60 or 70, which for a film with 19 million, that's kind of a lot higher than it was thought that it would get. Whereas on IMDb and on Rotten Tomatoes and on Metacritic, it was really plummeting down to the 3.2 and the 2.5 and IMDb of 5.6 or something ridiculous like that.
We often find things like, obviously like Mamma Mia and stuff like that get high cine scores because it's like a B-, even if the critics give it a F, because they, it's about what the audiences think and how much money it's going to make and how much fun people have, as well as how good it is. And there are other reasons.
Totally depends on whether it's a hit with its target audience. And if they deem they like it, they'll tell their friends, they'll come back.
Well, I suppose the whole point of Avatar is that every single person, they are designed that it hits every quadrant and blah blah blah. But whether it will, I don't know. Whether it's
certainly going to be a test of endurance, because that film opened in 2008. And speaking over the comical snoring sounds, will people still have the patience, still care? But we'll see.
In this modern world of people like looking at their mobile phones every 5 seconds and blah, 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 Netflix, TV show, stop it when you want after 30-minute chunks and stuff. Do people want a 3.5-hour epic as well?
Well, that's certainly going to be the test.
Because, even like people, when Endgame and stuff came out, which, people were invested in that shit. They've been building that audience for 10 years. There's not been this gap. Literally pretty much the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe has happened in the time since the first one. I think maybe the Hulk come out, but pretty much the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe has come and gone within the time that since the first Avatar.
No, that's absolutely right, because it was 2008 was Avatar, and Iron Man, which kicked it off, was 2008.
Yeah, so literally, pretty much.
And even a film that was generally well-liked, like The Batman, struggled to push itself to legs. I
think that was R-rated, wasn't it?
It was.
And I think that probably
R-rated.
held it back, whereas this is designed a bit more for families and blah, blah, blah.
You can take your little nippers to this one.
Wow.
And it's got Cliff Curtis in it, so it's going to be $1 billion hit. People love Cliff Curtis.
And Sam Worthington.
Oh, Sam Worthington.
That massive, massive guy who, they put in loads of films for about 2 years and every single one of them was a flop, but was critically panned.
People realised, I think we overestimated this investment.
Yeah. There are certain people that happens with. They're like, we're going to make this guy a thing. And people are like, we don't want this guy to be a thing.
Absolutely.
But yeah. But no,
poor lad.
That is an interesting piece of news and a piece of news that sickens me.
Bit overreach.
Almost sickens me as much as Matt Hancock in The Jungle, but that's another story.
Yeah, that is unfortunate.
Fuck that guy. Right, anyway. On to our films of the week.
Number 1.
I don't think if we even said what our films are yet.
We haven't. So let's set those up right now. We're doing 2 biopics, 2 music. No, not 2 music. 2 comedy-based biopics. One of them is Weird, the Al Yankovic story. I think that's the title. The other one is a futile and stupid gesture. The first, of course, is about Weird Al, his ascent, and that's our new movie, and it's sort of a parody of biopics. The second one is slightly more of a straight-laced biopic with punches of comedy in it because it's about the creation of National Lampoon, and that's a slightly older movie, although it's still very recent, and that one is on Netflix for anyone to find.
Yeah, they're both only. I mean, it's only 5 years old. I want to say 2017. I feel like I watched it when I was in China, maybe. But yeah, it's about 2017. So yeah, those are our movies, and as you rightly say, they are both biopics, both, maybe not kind of like straight walk the line style biopics, and have different degrees of surrealness and jokiness and kind of truth and lies and everything in between.
All mixed up in there.
So let's start out with Weird. Do you want to tell us about Weird?
Sure, I'll take it. Weird, the Al Yankovic story is the biopic about the ascent of Weird Al Yankovic, the guy that, if you have an internet connection, if you have ever been on YouTube, you've seen his parody songs. He's been around forever, for the longest time, and he got a start in the early 80s. And here he's played by Daniel Radcliffe as Weird Al, and it's about his rise to the top. He making his first parody songs, getting mentored by Dr. Demento, who's a big sort of funny guy on the radio at the time. And then it starts mixing in parody and nonsense into that. So he has a lurid affair with a famous pop star. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that it's Madonna.
It's in the trailer.
It's in the trailer. And then starts just kind of layering on nonsense, talking about his life fighting drug kingpins and life of crime, and the kind of going through all the steps that you would expect in a parody of a biopic, including the ascent, the buying the mansion, the drugs, the fighting, the infighting, and the fall. So, Johnny, what did you think of the Al Yankovic story?
Yeah, it was all right.
Yeah, it's hard to get too enthusiastic about this one.
I enjoyed it. It was fun. But so, backstory of it is it was started off as a Funny or Die short that was made into a Funny or Die movie. And every time that happens, it feels a little bit like it runs out of momentum. It's the same thing that they always used to get when they tried to make SNL shorts into movies. They often just ran out. The bar, say the Blues Brothers and a couple that worked, they kind of just used to run out of momentum pretty quickly.
It's like this episode.
I think it's just pure magic.
Pure magic.
Anyway, and it works on some level. I think it's funny. Daniel Radcliffe is great. He is really funny. I really like his version of Al. Has an all-star kind of guesting cast. There are some quite funny moments, but there's also some quite long and tedious moments. So to kind of pinpoint my example of where I think it's kind of pulls too long, the first time he starts singing, the first time he kind of gets this inspiration to start singing parody songs, although it's something he's wanted to do all his life. But the first time he kind of gets inspiration is he hears My Sharona on the radio, and then he's looking at some bologna. He's making his roommates some bologna sandwiches, and it takes him like 5 minutes to go from looking at some bologna to going my bologna, my, and it's something that could have happened in like a minute and a half, and that's just the whole film all the way through. Also, obviously, it's slightly based on a true story, ever so slightly, but it kind of, the thing it reminded me of most is Dewey Cox. The movie Dewey Cox, for those that you don't know, came out about 2007, I want to say 2008.
It does live in its shadow.
Yeah, and it's John C. Reilly movie, where it's basically a heavy parody on Walk the Line, but it has lots of other kind of things imposed on it. And obviously, it's a fake character as opposed to a real person that it's based on, but it is just kind of like over the top and silly and stuff. And there's something that just feels, and it's something that's in both of these. It's daddy issues at its core. And in the Dewey Cox, there's this running joke of the wrong kid died.
The wrong kid died.
The wrong kid died. And literally halfway through both of these films, me and Callum turned to each other and just went, the wrong kid died. Because it just steals that so much. So while it was, and it's nice and it's not too long. It's about maybe an hour and 45
in that neighborhood, in that range.
So reasonable length. Daniel Radcliffe's good. Bill Hader's good. All these kind of extra people are good in it.
I think you mean Rainn Wilson.
But Bill Hader's in it as well, isn't he?
Rainn Wilson is Dr.
Yeah,
Demento.
yeah, but Bill Hader is.
Oh yes, he's
record
the
exec.
record exec. Yes, he is.
But yeah, it kind of it feels cheap. It feels kind of. I don't know if any of you saw they had Johnny Depp playing Donald Trump about the time that Donald Trump was running for election, doing like an Alter the Deal movie, and that was only an hour long, I think, and that felt too long. It kind of stretches the joke out, makes up this silly fake history, and while it's funny in moments, it never kind of lives up to its expectations.
And that's absolutely one of the great sins, is that firstly it feels very cheap, as you said, and familiarity. Because as you mentioned, the problem is that it lives in the shadow of a far better, far slicker, far higher budgeted music parody already, which is Dewey Cox, Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story. But of course, that film lived in its own shadow of Walk the Line. That film was the kind of big one to parody, and I'm only going to use this word once because I overused it when we made this the first time. The tropes of those films,
and those tropes.
So it lives in the shadow of the daddy issues, of the drug addiction. There's a scene here where Weird Al goes to a party and it's full of all the wacky celebrities of the 1980s. So Devo, Elvira,
Dali.
Yeah, exactly. And they're all played by actors who are really super, super, super famous. And that's the big joke, which is a joke that is familiar if you've seen Walk Hard, because that's the joke whenever they meet the Beatles, Elvis, they're all played by super famous people, which is played straight in movies like Walk the Line, where not necessarily Walk the Line, but there's always a moment where he'll meet his idol or his hero in all of these movies, and it's usually played by a nice, fun cameo by a former Oscar-winning actor. So in the end, there's only so much mileage you can get out of parodying something that's already played in such a familiar fashion and living under the shadow of a better parody. So it lives under a double parody. And then the cheapness doesn't help, because anytime something could be elevated by the fact that they've got this wacky set piece or this wacky thing, like, okay, he goes to work in his dad's factory, which is often a thing. He gives up the pop star life, goes to the factory. And the factory is just like one half set. Like he stands in front of the machine.
Which also reminds me of Zoolander.
Yeah, where he goes down the mines.
Yeah.
But even then, Zoolander, that mine set looked really good.
Yeah,
and then the bar that they go to afterwards, where his pop is disapproving of him, that looks good. This one looks like they've just redressed an old set and put a bit of machinery in it.
Do you know what it looks like? It looks like a bad set out of like the first Austin Powers movie or something.
It really does. It looks like Dr. Evil's left.
Yeah, but on half the budget.
And this is clearly a problem, because they have to stretch out these they have about 4 sets in the movie. They've got the factory, they've got a couple of big concert sets.
It's just one set, and they just roll different things on there.
Yeah, exactly.
For the concert.
They've got the
house,
the mansion, and the house that he grew up in. So there's about maybe 10 or so sets.
Don't forget,
throughout.
There's that really high budget set for the warehouse where the drug lords are,
which probably was the same set as the factory.
Yeah, it almost certainly was.
Each scene seems like it goes on for about 10 minutes, because it's like, well, we're not moving from here.
No,
this is all our money,
and we're not moving the camera either.
We're not moving the camera. I mean, we spent a pretty penny on Evan Rachel Wood, Daniel Radcliffe, and Rainn Wilson, and that's pretty much it, guys.
I think we talked about Rainn Wilson today.
Someone else talked about Rainn Wilson?
We talked about Rainn Wilson because she's in Jingle All the Way.
Oh yeah. Interesting.
Anyway, on another note.
On another topic.
but no, So no, it's, it really, it's fine.
It is fine. And this will be a bigger problem in the next movie, because this is a parody. It doesn't really matter, but the costumes and the fake wigs and stuff, they do look awful. But here you sort of brush it aside, because it doesn't matter in this film. It will be a problem in the next film.
And I think that ties us up nicely for an advert break. and welcome back. I think it's time that we dive into
A Futile and Stupid Gesture,
which is a 2017 film about the life of Doug Kenney. So Doug Kenney was the creator of National Lampoon. National Lampoon, for those that don't know, was a laugh rag, as they like to call them. It was kind of like a step forward from a slightly higher brow thing from Mad Magazine, which was big in the States. For those of us in the UK, it's kind of similar to Private Eye. I think there's a lot of overlap actually in a lot of the styles of the way things are done. Although the one thing I would say with Private Eye in the UK is it does actually have some genuine hard-hitting journalism in it, buried at the back pages, but that's another story. But yeah, and it starts off with him at university. There is a weird narrative crux of like a future version of himself talking back to the past that kind of goes through it. And it starts off with him at Harvard, work on the Harvard Lampoon, which is where the idea for National Lampoon came from. So him and his friend, who I've forgotten his name, that is played by Donald Gleason, they both basically run the Harvard Lampoon while they're there, make a huge success of it, and make it a ton of money by making a parody book based on Lord of the Rings, called, I think, Board of the Rings?
Yes, Board of the Rings.
Board of the Rings, which actually becomes a massive seller nationwide, and they turn around and with some convincing think, you know what, I think we could make a weekly magazine out of this. So they move to New York, set up on Madison Avenue, and bring in a whole cast of comedy geniuses, one would say. When you actually look down the list of people and what they were involved in before and after National Lampoon, there's some British people that were involved in like Spike Mulligan's show and that kind of thing. There were people who ended up going on to SNL, people that ended up writing big movies, people that ended up directing big comedy movies, including the National Lampoon movies. And he makes, obviously, a success of that magazine. He then goes on and makes a success of a radio show where there was a whole cast of people who would become comedy greats like Chevy Chase, who were involved in, and then went on to make movies with John Belushi, like Animal House, and finally Caddyshack. So yeah, it's a movie and a biopic about his life. What did you think, Callum?
Well, my biggest issue with it was just how safe it was. So I think there's a few issues there. Firstly, they really want to pay tribute to this guy. Everyone involved, and the director is David Wayne, who did I always forget the exact title of this, but Wet Hot American Summer, which was a very surreal and odd film. And
John Benjamin plays a can of beans, I think.
Yes, exactly. So the issue with this whole film is that it just feels too safe. It's far too safe for its own good. They clearly want to pay tribute to this guy, so they introduce moments of surrealness. So, for example, like Johnny set up, that you see a future version of this guy looking back over his life, which suggests that maybe they might introduce moments of surrealness, moments of weirdness, moments that might shock you. But other than that wraparound that they bring in, it just becomes a regular biopic, which becomes an issue because if they're not going to play it weird, then it has to rely on its quality on its own as a biopic. So and then you start looking at things like, okay, well, it's just a straight biopic. It follows the nuts and bolts, the ascent, the drug addictions, the breakdowns, the freakouts, and at best, it's only okay. And because it's only okay, you find yourself kind of struggling to latch onto something that's truly special. And if they introduce more surrealness, like a good example would be American Splendor, the film about Harvey Picard, which just went in full tilt with how surreal, how odd, how unusual it was. And because it was an indie film that wasn't like, this is produced by Netflix, and Netflix has certain constraints of what cameras you can use. All of them end up looking quite mechanically similar. And it had that freedom to be weird, but also on its own terms as an independent film and a tribute. Or it could have done something like Bob Dylan's I'm Not There, which introduced different actors, crazy stuff, and made you feel like, yes, this is a biopic that I imagine, not knowing Bob Dylan, I imagine he'd approve of, because it mirrors his career. And for something as revolutionary and evolutionary as this magazine, as National Lampoon magazine, which often broke the format. There's a scene, for example, where you look at one of the comics that they make, and in that comic panel, the subjects of the panel keep pointing up and out at different panels. I wanted to see that, but in film form, because it seems like that's what the magazine deserved. But instead, we got a fairly straight biopic. And when it's a fairly straight biopic, you just look at mechanical nuts and bolts. Like, cinematography's okay, acting is mostly good. The wigs and costumes, and this is where it's a problem, they do look really bad, and it just looks cheap. And I think all of those things, it's just an unfortunate series of events, and not the Lemony Snicket film, which collides to make something that ends up not being very interesting. And in a way, it's a lot more disappointing than the Yankovic movie, which never really intended to enlighten or do anything other than just amuse and entertain and just be a bit silly. This film has loftier goals, and it kind of stumbles on them.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, it's an interesting story, and there are some funny bits, and a lot of what's funny is what they say, because they're funny, interesting people saying funny, interesting things. But it kind of doesn't know what it wants to be. 1 minute it's surreal and all over the place, and then the next minute it's playing a straight biopic. And as you say, I think a lot of that comes from the fact that people really respected him, who made it, and wanted him to, be, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of be remembered very fondly and in a nice way,
yes.
and talk about him nicely. But also they're comedians, and they're trying to make a comic movie. And I also think there's budgetary constraints involved as well. They probably couldn't afford to do some of the most maybe surreal bits they wanted to do. Again, I think they were limited with sets. I think they were limited with costumes. And maybe that's why I thought they had to be a bit funny and couldn't do a straight biopic, because they thought, oh, well, if we've got these costumes, people aren't going to believe it if we try and make it too straight. So again, I think that for whatever reason, it was just a bit all over the place and a bit of a mess. So while I enjoy it and quite like it and think it's quite funny in points, and I think he's an interesting character and it's an interesting story to tell, there is a hole that you could drive a bus through in it.
You can certainly see how they've been hamstrung at every corner, where they want to do something, but it's just something they can't do. And it's only in those moments where they do allow themselves to be a bit silly and play with the format somewhat that it really comes alive. So there's a really good joke at one point where someone says, I know that none of these actors look like, because they introduce all the famous people, Chevy Chase, Bill Murray. I know that none of these actors look like these people, but hey, do you think that actor looks like me when I was 27? Hey, do you believe that he's 27?
Yeah, do you think Bill Hader's... not
Bill Hader.
What's his name?
Will Forte.
Will Forte.
And I really like Will Forte as well. Like, he's a really good actor, and I think he plays the role really well.
He's very committed. He's very committed to selling it, and he's not really known for drama. So some of those later scenes that become more dramatic, where he has to go toe-to-toe with someone like Donald Gleeson, who is more acquitted and committed to dramatic acting. He stands toe-to-toe with him, and you wouldn't know that he isn't a dramatic actor. He's very good.
It's really believable, and yeah, I think I really enjoyed it. Just as a whole, I thought it was a really enjoyable, fun piece, but that had some big holes in it.
Unfortunately, I think missed opportunity would be the best word.
Yeah, which I think I would argue is the name of the game for both movies.
For both movies, absolutely.
So last week, I guessed your score for both movies.
You did.
Dead on.
Yes, you did.
And then for this recording of this, first time round, I guessed your score dead on.
Yes,
now, I'm not going to do it again this time because I assume your score's the same.
It is the same.
But, yeah, just want to put that out there, because coming up in our Christmas episode, I also do the same thing again.
And it's getting a little spooky.
Well, it's not spooky. You're just fucking predictable.
Maybe.
But anyway.
At least I'm consistent.
Yeah, if you say so. 3-star The Terror in The Guardian.
Yeah, but they're the only paper that gave it that. You know that.
They're consistent.
New York Times, 5 stars. You know, name a paper, 4 or 5 stars it got.
What did Speed Racer get?
No. Can't remember suddenly. Oh, it's a good thing that the internet's down. I can't look that up.
I can. I have 3G.
Ah.
Anywho, so tell me, Callum, what score will you give Weird?
5 out of 10.
And why are you giving it 5 out of 10?
Well, the aforementioned problems, the familiarity, the staginess, the fact it's sort of blocked and paced quite sluggishly. But you have moments like Daniel Radcliffe, very good. Weird Al's input, very, very appreciated. So it has some of the fun and the silliness. So it saves it from being like a 3 or a 4. But it is just a bit too stodgy to be anything better than a 5.
Okay. And I'm going to give it a 6 just because I think it's funny. I think it's a worthwhile 90 minutes. It made me laugh. Overall, I enjoyed it. But it's not like it's 3 stars. It's not. It can't be anything more than a 3-star movie in anyone's world. I think the only reason I really give it 6 out of 10 is because of Daniel Radcliffe. Because I just like him. But yeah. And a futile and stupid gesture.
Again, that's 5 out of 10. And I think for this reason, it's a more disappointed 5 out of 10 because the moments of brilliance flare up and you want the movie to be that, but then it just falls down into, again, a familiar pattern. And, you know, it even has the disapproving dad, wrong kid died, etc., etc., etc. And you just kind of wanted it to be as weird and as mad and as ambitious as the magazine is telling the story of. And it's just unfortunate that it just falls down on those same hurdles. And it's a 5 out of 10. It's a heavy-hearted 5 out of 10. And for you?
I'm also going to still give it a 6 out of 10. And again, similar reasons to the first movie. It was enough there for me to enjoy. I feel like any film that I enjoy. And I did, again, the lead character was well acted. Pretty much all the characters were well acted. It was solid all the way through. It was just inconsistent. And like you say, the highs were really high. But I didn't think the lows were really low. I thought the lows were fine-ish, just about. So, you know, it's watchable. So,
yeah, it is.
6 out of 10. So we've given both films 5.5 out of 10.
Yep.
Yeah, exciting times. So, yeah, that is the second time we've recorded that podcast. And it better not have broken this time. And this is goodbye from us for this week.
Yes, we'll see you around, and the next one is going to be a humdinger with our first guest.
Well, I don't know if that's going to be the next one.
Well, hang around for that one if it isn't the next one.
Yeah, I think we might keep that to the second week of December.
Yeah, stick around, folks. Stick around. It gets better, I promise.
If you say so. I don't know. Tonally, you might get whiplash from the episode, but we'll find out.
We'll
see what
certainly
you think.
find out.
Thanks a lot, guys, and have a lovely week.
Bye.
Bye. Loser.